boy, I really am happy with this picture. Hi, I'm Allan Crockett. I'm a painter, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a couple little paintings on paper and just talk about my ideas about painting, art, what have you, as I go. The thing that, one of the things that interests me about painting, I guess, is that it allows me to kind of move from a place of chaos to discover some kind of entity or thing that I've never really seen or experienced before. With the kind of art that I do, I guess people call it abstract painting. I kind of think of it as being kind of like prefigurative work, work that kind of exists prior to getting to a point of definition, that you know what it is. So what I often do is just start off moving my brush around, making little marks, little shapes that allow me to kind of, it's kind of like doodling. Oops, I just kind of dropped that on the, so I'll make little marks and start playing off of those marks, maybe repeating certain shapes, getting involved in just what the paint looks like. So when I start a painting, I give myself absolute freedom to do anything that I want to do. So you can see that I don't have any kind of preconception in mind, but kind of give my body over or my head over to just kind of playing. Sometimes I'll be aggressive in what I do. Sometimes I'll be real gentle or sensitive. The thing about painting is that it allows for the body's response to be a part of the work. What I'm doing with my hand or my body in some way will be reflected in the paint itself. The color what I do with color is sort of intuitive. I just let it happen. And how it mixes is just what happens in the course of making the painting. One thing that a painter always has to be conscious of is the fact that everything you do it may go or it may always be there. So I always try to put myself in some kind of state of mind of being alert, being ready to take advantage of any of the good things as well as the bad things that might transpire as I work. So like right now I have this drip. Is that going to be a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know yet. But I'm going to possibly give myself permission to take, or I'll leave it open to take advantage of that. Maybe by pressing on the brush, I'll kind of amplify that idea I'll take what was an accident and make it kind of more planned. So I'm going to move from that painting to this painting, and this kind of typifies the way I work. I like to work on more than one piece at a time, so that things don't become too precious. So that it helps me to be more critical about the things that I do. Working on the black, I always feel like it's a little bit like using a sparkler at night. There's something, every color that you use just seems to kind of pop out. And I'm kind of conscious of not trying to make the same kinds of marks or shapes necessarily in this painting that I've done in the painting that I just began on the other side, and perhaps using slightly different colors and what have you. You can see how different working off of this colored ground makes the work. We already have a kind of a space that is defined and exists that whatever I do kind of plays on or against. That little hole needed to be entered in some way. By what? Maybe by some kind of... Actually, I think that I could be a real famous painter, actually, if I painted, if I didn't paint so abstractly. But I can't help it. I just like putting down things, having sort of a little idea in my head about what it might be, and then changing my mind and having it not be at all what the original impulse for making the shape or the thing was. And I'm not going to tell you what some of those impulses or ideas might be. Maybe somebody will guess, probably not, as they look at this thing. But often I will have a certain kind of form or shape or thing in mind, and I'll just kind of like to start off with that, play with that, and then leave it, interrupt it. Have no idea what I'm actually doing here. That has to be blue, or kind of blue. I'd kind of like to do an action and then maybe just let the rhythm of that action or something along those lines just kind of generate whatever follows. A lot of painting is doing something and then reflecting on what you're doing, asking yourself, seeing the possibilities in the things that you've done. So in some ways it's like, maybe it's kind of like you putting something out in a sort of solid sort of fashion that causes you to, or causes me at least, to think about, it makes concrete perhaps certain kinds of shapes, ideas, colors that that hold some fascination or interest or whatnot. I think maybe painting in that way, painting is sort of like it's sort of like taking an adventure as opposed to going on a trip. When you go on a trip, when you're going from here to Cleveland, you know that you're going where you're going and approximately when you're going to arrive and what you're going to do when you get there and so on. I kind of think of painting as being antithetical to that. Painting is like, you know you're going out the door, but you don't know where you're going to go, where you're going to end up, what you're going to experience. Is it going to be pleasant, unpleasant, interesting, boring, challenging? And that's sort of the challenge and the fun of it, that, at least in the way that I think about painting, is that you're kind of open to these discoveries of geez, what's going to happen? How are these things going to turn out? What am I going to allow myself to do, not to do, in the course of making a painting? So right now with this guy, there's certain things that I'm kind of liking right now about the piece. I'm kind of liking the difference between the sort of matte quality. Both of these things, this shape here is sort of dark. It's sort of like this weird blob, but it seems to have some sort of character, and there seems to be some sort of relationship that's happening between this, and then what is this blue that's hardly discernible doing it, arcing over and dialoguing with this shape, and this seems to have a certain kind of it moves through the picture like maybe like smoke or maybe like writing, writing that both creates itself and uncreates itself. As you recall, I kind of went this way and then I went back against that. An awful lot of painting for me involves not only, it involves both acts of creation and acts of destruction. So like right now, one of the things I'm really questioning is that yellow line that I brought across there. And so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for another kind of black color that I have lurking. Well, I'll use this. No, I won't use this green color instead. And I'm going to kind of maybe challenge or in some way, that's beautiful green, isn't it? Deal with this. It's just there's something just too rigid about that. Gee, it makes kind of like a nice little thing growing out of this brown shape right now. Maybe we'll let that be. Interesting how this green can suddenly change just by adding a little white to it. Becomes quite kind of gaudy, doesn't it? It's kind of neat as it goes through that blue. It's this sort of turquoisey color. The lovely thing about starting a piece is that you can give yourself total freedom. And then the more you get into the piece, the less freedom that one can allow themselves, because you start to find things that you kind of like and want to hold on to, want to keep. And right now I'm looking for a Prussian blue, a Payne's gray, and I'm not finding it for the must be over where all my other paint is. So I'm going to move over here. Look for that sucker. While we're over here, this is the last painting that I made. This painting is 60 by 70 inches. Most of the large paintings in the studio are that size. And I just completed this a couple days ago. And in this painting, like with the black painting, this started with a kind of colored ground. I started by putting down a particular ground. In this case, it was sort of blue, and then I mixed some green into the blue. And the choice of that color for the ground was because a lot of my paintings of late have kind of come off of warm colored grounds, and so it was sort of, I wanted to kind of challenge what was becoming a little bit of a habitual way of working, and or color palette choices by using a color that always often gives me a lot of problems, because blue is such an associative color, like sky, water, that sort of thing, and yet I try very much in my work not to have the paintings, I want them to stop short of defining a particular thing, place, so on. Although it's okay for them to have, for me at least, to create certain associations or whatnot. So anyway, this work went pretty. It took. I think I probably worked for about 2 weeks on this painting, and one of the. Sometimes I'll set certain kinds of. I'll be kind of arbitrary on some of the choices that I make. And for some reason I said to myself when I was working on this painting, okay, the one thing that you're not going to do in this painting is, because you've relied so much on yellow in most of the paintings you've done of late, I'm not going to use yellow in the painting. And so it got to a point where I thought, geez, I think maybe I've made a painting here and there was no yellow in it. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, oh God, it just has to have yellow. And so you can see that I broke into it with yellows, and that caused me to kind of rethink in some way the whole painting and break into it all over the place by bringing in greens, these intense greens which I hadn't had previously, and so on and so forth. So I kind of went from a place where the painting was almost complete and almost satisfying to me, but had become, by virtue of being complete, kind of rigid, to a place that when the painting got finished off, it got finished off with the same kind of anything goes attitude with which the painting began. And I kind of liked that movement back to the freedom and the chaos almost with which the painting began. So let's see if we can find that Payne's Gray that I'm searching high and low for. Ready? In destruction, there's creation. And discovery. This is just a wonderful way, for me at least, of allowing me to do things or find things that I could never do in a conscious sort of fashion. Like that little wonderful little yellow blip there. So maybe I should take this over onto this, kind of bring some element of what was happening on the other one onto this one, but a little bit different. So what are you doing, Allan? What do you got going here? Nobody knows. just shifting to this bigger brush was kind of a wonderful, it gives such a different way of marking. And I kind of like the contrast between these sort of smaller, more drawn things and this more painterly swishing around thing that's happening right now. All of a sudden, you start to get kind of different textures in the paint, which can be potentially interesting. It's always a challenge to know how open to keep a piece, how much space you want, or how you might want to close it off. Now I'm kind of going back in the idea of kind of drawing in some way into that color that I've already put down. The drawing gives, for me at least, it starts to make, I feel like it's a real particular activity, even though the thing drawn may not have necessarily a identifiable quality. I guess I should let that touch that line. Often with my painting, I guess I think about it almost like Rube Goldberg things, where one thing touches another thing, which causes another thing to happen, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of, there is that kind of energy, like, you know, this goes up and is covered with this comes and touches this, rests on this, which seems to have some kind of thing that happens here. Ooh, there's a nice little shape that maybe I'll just bring out a little bit more right here, of a sort of little thing that seems to kind of come out of that, kind of like that. Color kind of gets mixed both on the palette and just on the painting. I'm thinking what this guy needs is something that comes down, breaks over it, maybe gets repeated. So have to be careful not to. I have a tendency maybe sometimes to get too how would I put it? Follow my impulses too literally, and I have to always interrupt, not go where I mean to go. A lot of painting is also about what happens at the edges or theoretically off the edges. The painting exists in a rectangle, but often it talks about things that exist outside the painting, and I really love playing around with edges to kind of manifest those sorts of things. So right now I kind of like some of the things that are happening in this piece. Seems like there's something about that isn't so interesting. Hard to say what that's going to look like when I take off the tape that's around there. But it might look better with little, with these little lines here that seem to be like little things that a cartoonist might use to show smell that emanates off of things. And I often do think in terms of like cartoons and stuff, because actually that was my upbringing as an artist, was looking at cartoons. So maybe here, now, I don't know, maybe here we've got, should I make a connection between this and this? They already kind of connected, those same shapes going the other way. It probably doesn't need to be connected, but maybe this needs to be played with a little bit more. Red on red. Fun. Okay, it's time to, one of the things that you always have to do as a painter is you're always in the process of cleaning brushes. I've got this great brush cleaner, totally biodegradable, not harmful to the environment, that you can clean your oil paint with. And then you just put it in water, and voila, you have a pretty clean brush. So, how long does a painting take? You know, for me, usually paintings go on for days, sometimes months, sometimes years, but sometimes they come off in 2 or 3 hours. Actually, this yellow painting, I spent, I think, 4 days preparing the surface of the painting, gessoing it, sanding it, gessoing it, sanding it, so that the surface was just immaculate, and then putting this sort of yellow wash on it, and then I began painting into it. And part of the process on the large paintings, anyway, of painting, is to not only paint on them on the wall, but I'll take them off the wall. And I have these great brushes, that most of which I've made, which allow me to not only work on them here, these kind of long-handled brushes, but when I'm down on the floor, I can paint on the floor with these guys too. So often what you'll find me doing, or what I'll find myself doing, is making these kind of little marks and stuff, both up here when the paintings are on the wall and down here on the floor. And in this particular painting, it was kind of one of those days when I had Walt Disney's magic brush, and it seemed like I could do no wrong. Every mark that I made seemed to be a right mark for me, or every color came off. And so actually the actual painting of this painting was about a day and a half after spending all that time preparing it. And it almost felt illegal. But that's just the way of it. I think painting is a dialogue, it's not a monologue. And I have to listen to what's happening here, and you know, it's kind of like this give and take between the painter and the painting. And when the painting, if the painting gets to a point that says, let me alone, it's my responsibility to kind of listen to that. And at the point I left this alone, I thought, my God, this is, you know, it's playful, it's dancing, it's full of energy. The only thing that I could do at the point is now would be just to kind of refine it, which would be to be conservative, would be to be taking away this kind of rush of energy that seems to exist in the painting. The last thing that I usually do with paintings is give them a title, and this painting is titled Seven Woofs, like woof woof dog, and in a way it's sort of a it's not a title that necessarily describes anything in the painting, but it does describe, it's actually in reference to an author that has always been one of my favorite authors, Henry Miller, who I haven't actually read in years, but I think his book Tropic of Capricorn ended, the last 7 words in the book were 7 woofs. Woof, 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 whatever, if that's 7. And it was to kind of talk about this, it was used to kind of describe the mental state that he found himself in as the book ended. And so I thought it was, I enjoyed kind of appropriating that aspect of his writing to put, you know, to title the work with. And I must say that actually things like literature, music, philosophy are of interest to me, and I find that they, in some fashion or other, reinforce aspects or things in my work. So, for example, I read Giles Deleuze and Guattari, especially this book's Seven Plateaus, I think that's the name of it, all of a sudden I'm spacing it. But they talk about things like the rhizome, and which is grass, for example, is a typical rhizome, and how it differs from things like trees that have this central core. A rhizome moves out, develops. If you chop it off, it doesn't have a core. It moves all over the place, reacts and interreacts with the things in its environment. And that's kind of, after the fact, after reading 1,000 Plateaus, that's the name of the book, after reading that I thought, well, there's something about what he's talking about in that book with the attitudes that maybe I kind of court in my own work. And maybe it's also that kind of idea of play and joy and whatnot that they seem to celebrate in that work as well. So anyhow, I don't know how I got onto this painting. But, I know, just time. One doesn't know, you never know how long a work is going to take. Interestingly, sometimes smaller work actually takes longer than bigger work, maybe because the focus is different, I see the whole thing as a totality, which causes me to have to think about it in different ways. So, like with these little guys, I'm not sure how long I'm going to be on them. It could be just a short while, or maybe it could be days, weeks, months, years. The painting actually that I completed right before the yellow painting that I was talking about, I guess I worked on from 1999 to this year, so that was a 3-year painting. That's not typical, but it happens. So back to this guy. Since I have this in my hand, I want to do something with it. I started off with a line, so I think I'm going to begin again with a line of another color, in a way. Ooh. One of the things in using a tool like this is that it's sort of awkward, and so it allows me to kind of my control of it is different. And so it allows me to make marks that I can't ordinarily make. How long am I going to do this? I don't know. Oops. I guess that's a good place to stop. It just whipped off. But this is an example, what does this have to do with any of the other things? I don't know. Maybe it's related. I mean, it's sort of a shape that's not too unlike these, except it's made up of these kind of lines that kind of end in these little dots. And basically, it was a way of kind of taking the pigment that was here and kind of moving it down and mixing it in with some of these other things. Let's see what this brush does. It makes a very beautiful, fine black line. I can control this brush, it seems like, much easier. Than the other brush. Hard to see that black. But one of the things that when I just made that one mark, I kind of got interested in the fact of perhaps playing with the idea of a different idea about space. And that's one thing that painting is about, is creating the space of the painting. So, I'm going to put these little puppies away. Probably leave those guys. Let's rethink this red. Ooh, that's a bad spot there. It's getting real solid. I have no idea how to deal with this. Because I really like this stuff over there that I've just covered up. So, nice thing about working against the wall is that you can really exert muscular pressure. In scraping stuff away. It's just, so maybe we should that's a better color. It kind of takes this thing that flows and then kind of blasts out, amplifies it as it comes out on the right. Actually, I probably wouldn't have made that orange in a conscious sort of way. So it kind of made itself in an unconscious way in the painting here. Where are we going to go with this guy? I think we have to get some fresh white on here. and do some editing. That's nice. Sometimes just a little touch can be just what the doctor ordered. Just gentle. Question I'm having as I'm looking at this is like, okay, you've left that space empty. Is that okay? I have this sort of horror vacui attitude, and I have a hard time leaving spaces, but sometimes I have to really tell myself, just hold off. Don't rush in to fill every existing space on the piece. A big part of painting is actually, at some point, just stepping back and thinking about what you've done, why you've done it, what's happening, what you might do. This kind of being critical with the work, and that's where time actually comes into play too. I mean, even on this painting, even though I said it only took a day and a half or so to paint it, I kept coming into the studio again and again and again, trying to kind of check it out, see if it's stuck, because sometimes one can have an initial positive response about what you're doing, but it just falls away the next day. And so you can't always trust those initial feelings about work. You have to keep checking it out. Even right now, as I'm looking at it, I'm still checking it out to see if it's working. Maybe this painting needs a little of that softness. Let me see. I don't know. Can't see it in this painting. Well, maybe this little. Yeah, I kind of like that. How that kind of echoed the shape, went outside of it. Kind of like this weird shape that gets picked up on that line that I made. Find myself questioning this now. Maybe what I need to do is kind of interrupt that shape a little bit. And it's a good chance to use a color that I haven't used at all in the painting. So here goes. We'll see. This is real. Maybe it gets to kind of interact with this brownish shape. Look how shiny it is. And it needs some red then over here. And Used to have a little hairdo. Yeah, wrong. There's almost like a kind of, and this is what happens with me in painting, I start to feel as if there's certain kinds of, you know how like when you were a little kid and you were looking at, let's say, the patterns in plywood or patterns in maybe shadows in your room where things almost take on some kind of recognizability, some kind of entity seems to exist in there. Well, that I'm beginning to feel like there's these, like this thing is beginning to get kind of a personality. Bad move. See if we can make a bad move a good move. Not yet. What is happening? I don't know, but I'm starting to find some things that are kind of interesting in this thing.